Now the political right is embracing all the same talking points. They're covering up for the same things that they covered up for Biden, but they're covering up for Trump. Trump's got cue cards. He probably had a stroke. He's having secret MRIs. He's doing the exact same things Biden did. He's promoting the destruction of the Houthis through drone bombing. I'm not. It's a separate issue, but like he said, Biden was crazy for doing that, and then he did literally the same thing. Because I know quite a bit about Larry Fink, and now I don't know if he's directly, but he's indirectly running the World Economic Forum too. I do know that the idea of owning nothing and being happy, that originally it wasn't even Klaus Schwab's statement. It was another woman that worked for the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab embraced it, but this whole idea is very clearly, embodied in the Larry Fink BlackRock model, which is that they own everything, and then they tell you that you're happy. Literally, he calls himself the Dark Elf. He's like a Jewish magician, and he advocates for a techno monarchy. He wants the U.S., to be controlled by a technocratic monarchy, like a technocratic king, which is what they've bred J.D. Vance to be. Make no mistake about it. Element of it, and what these people worship. I think that at the core of it, you could look at it from the point of view of, I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with like Black European grimoires, how to summon spirits, things that were usually written by people that they were writing things in code, or it was people that were insane, or it was the church. Sometimes the church would publish things like this. The idea of like black magic, the idea of using some sort of ritual magic to literally conjure and summon something. I mean, the Queen of England did this. John Dee and Edward Kelly famously, the angel script, angel magic, which ties in with Crowley and Jack Parsons and all that.
If you enjoy our content and want to keep seeing amazing guests and insightful conversations, please like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support the channel directly, you can contribute through Zelle or Venmo. Every little bit helps me continue bringing you interesting guests and great content. Thank you so much for your support. Hello, everyone. This is the Free American Press with your host, Alexander Horat. Today, we're joined with my brother, Joseph Horat, and a very special guest, Ryan Gable. And Ryan Gable is an accomplished broadcaster, author, and host of the Secret Teachings podcast and radio show with over 15 years of thought-provoking content. Drawing inspiration from Manly P. Hall's Secret Teachings of All Ages, the program explores a sophisticated array of topics, including parapolitics, occult studies, paranormal phenomenon, symbolism, anthropology, and health. Hello, Ryan. We thank you for coming back on the show.
Thank you for having me back on the show.
Yeah, so our first question has to do with digital ID. So we just saw that the UK just recently announced that they're implementing a digital ID. Basically, if you want to work, you have to have a digital ID. So I want to get your thoughts on this and what the UK is doing.
Yeah, there are several countries that have implemented either a policy, a plan, or they've started to implement the actual ID itself. There was a story out of the UK, and I think that what you're referring to is probably the one that got the most attention. But there are digital ID systems in place all over the world. China already essentially has digital identification to some extent, or digital passports at least. Things that we saw in the US that were introduced during the quote pandemic. But there are some countries that have gone maybe even further than the UK. Some countries that have begun to strip away people's, well, I guess their bank accounts because they don't have verification to the digital identification system. I think it's important to point out, I've never heard anybody talk about this in relation to the digital ID. Are you guys aware of Sam Altman's orb? You may have heard me mention it
Yes,
on my
yes.
show.
A world coin, right?
Yeah, they give you the world coin, and they give you a digital identification number, and it determines what, quote unquote, it determines whether or not you're human, which is just a very scary thing to even say that that's what it's going to determine. It makes me want Sam Altman to put his face in front of it because I don't think he is a human.
Yeah.
But that that is in essence, I think, what the digital ID or the idea of the digital ID is. It's almost like erasing people's actual identities, like erasing your humanity completely, and then allowing, in the case of Sam Altman, some technocrat, or in the case of, let's say, the UK government, letting a government determine whether or not you're actually human. So like they just wipe out your existence. And then if you don't have the digital identification, then you, even if you already had a bank account, if you had a, like in Vietnam, for example, 86 million bank accounts just wiped out recently because
Wow.
people already had bank accounts, already had an identity, but the government determined that they didn't have the digital identity, so they just wiped out the bank accounts. And that is obviously a very, very scary thing, not just because it's a policy, but because this is already being done in some places. It's not some futuristic thing that we're worried about, like a lot of quote conspiracies. It's something that's already happening. That what happened in Vietnam was, what was that, 2, 3 months ago, I believe it was.
Wow. Can you tell us a little more about what happened in Vietnam? What was the reason for them doing that, that government over there?
Because they didn't have the digital ID attached to the bank account. So like every bank's probably a little different, every country's a little different. I'm not sure because I don't really deal with banks. But when you go to a bank and you have your ID and you proof of residency or whatever they might require to open up an account, people already had that approval, whatever it was in Vietnam. But whenever the deadline went in, expired, or whenever the policy went into play in Vietnam, people didn't have the new identification. So the banks just were wiping people's accounts. 86 million was the estimate of how many accounts were wiped out. That might have meant, some people had 2, 3, 4 accounts, business accounts, maybe. It wasn't like 86 million people, probably, but it's still a lot. One is too much because you don't have a digital identification card or number.
Does this, are they trying to replace like the social security number? Like, or, you know, is that like the replacement, this thing?
Honestly, I don't know. I'm not an expert on the digital identification, although I've talked about it for years. I wouldn't consider myself an expert on it. I think every country has a slightly different intention behind it. I can't say for sure. I don't think anybody could. I'll give you some examples though. In China, they use the digital identification as like it's part of your social credit score. And that might not be like people look up China social credit score, and a lot of what China does is more of like it's like an idea, and it's also the way that the government operates in the sense that it's not like a program per se. It's not like a company that does it. It's not like a thing that you can write down. It's like a general policy about how they run society, right?
Gotcha.
Because even though we don't have that in the US, like you would, if you tried to type in US social credit score, like nobody actually has a social credit score, but you also kind of do because what you post on social media can be 15 years later, can be drawn upon, as Edward Snowden said too, to kind of paint people as villains for something that they posted out of context, 10, 15 years ago. So like you don't necessarily have a social credit system or a social credit score in the US, but then you also kind of do. It's just kind of how society functions. So in China, that seems to be how it works. I don't know every detail about China. Of course, people that might live there and experience that daily could correct the record or could add to what I'm saying. But what my point is, there's probably different methods and different ways that these things are implemented, but it's all clearly based on the same agenda. And the agenda is quite simply just control, however it manifests. So it could be a COVID passport, or it could be in China, I've seen some videos of people that they post them online, and maybe they're leaked from China. They send them, maybe they send it to somebody who lives outside of China because they've got a firewall there that Google helps them maintain, from what I understand. But I've seen videos from China where it has nothing necessarily to do with health. You just, if you don't have the appropriate credit score, which in China is actually kept, like there's a blacklist of people, journalists, etc. And if you're on that list, you can't go buy food some places. You can't buy a train ticket. You can't travel. So from listening to my show, you probably know that I like to break things down and pull them apart and put them back together rather than give like a straightforward, I know for sure, absolute answer.
Yeah.
My goal is to show, on my show, and then to answer your question, that there's a lot of different reasons and a lot of different motivations behind it. And even in the case of some place like China, where they have a specific like a blacklist, social credit scores are also like a general way that things are run. Where if you say, I mean, you just look at politics in America as a social credit score. Look at Rand Paul and Thomas Massey. I don't really care what people think of them politically, but the way that the White House has treated them simply because they said, I don't really agree with what you're doing here. Now they've been basically cut out of the American political system, and both sides hate them. And that in and of itself is kind of like a social credit score. That's how China became what China is, because that kind of behavior has been tolerated by the citizens. There's been very little rebellion against it. You can't necessarily blame the Chinese for that considering the circumstances, but in the US, that's how those kinds of things come about. And politics and the stuff that we debate about isn't really a social credit score system. But I mean, if you say something about the government or you expose a crime in China, you get put on that list. Can't buy food, can't take a train, can't get a mortgage. Well, how's that any different than what's happening to Rand Paul or what's happening to Thomas Massey, or I'm not the biggest fan, but happening to Tucker Carlson or happening to anybody for that matter in the media? It's the same exact kind of a thing. I hope that answers your question,
I
Adam.
definitely agree. We actually had a good friend named David Knight that was taken
Hmm.
off PayPal and all that. So we've seen this happen in real time. I guess my next follow-up question is, so which countries do you think will be the last to implement a digital ID? Do you think the US is going to do that fairly soon, a complete digital ID overhaul?
I don't know. I mean, that's like obviously an opinionated question. In my opinion, I think that we're already there. I think we're actually past that point. It's almost kind of like I don't know if you guys remember the revamping of the X-Files when they released a new season several years ago, and there was an episode. I think they were bait. I think Chris Carter got the idea from Boston Dynamics for the to use those little robot dogs. And then the TV show Black Mirror also did something on the robot dogs, a black and white episode called Metalhead. And
Hmm.
people at the time were saying, "Oh, this is predictive programming." And I remember watching those episodes, and I think I did a show on them, and I had said it's not predictive programming. I did shows years ago on those robot dogs at Boston Dynamics. They already built them. These TV shows kind of maybe introduce them to the public, but that's not predictive programming. It's already there, and that's how in for my opinion, that's how I see your question is like a lot of these things that we think are coming or we think are going to arrive at some future science fiction futuristic date, like they're already here. They're already implemented in some way. Because back to your other question, the idea of what's happening when you question, the Democrats or the Republicans, or you question the status quo of anything, you automatically get put onto that kind of social blacklist. Like we're already at the point of no return, whether it's like a formalized system or it's an informal system. We're already living in the midst of it right now. And don't and we shouldn't delude ourselves into thinking that, China is some kind China's always the example people give. China's some kind of total like authoritarian nightmare. It is, but also people still get up and go to work every day. People still go to the movies. People still go to bars. People still, take the trains and go see their friends and family. It's like anytime there's a civil war in a country, like people still live their lives. They still go and do things. There's just the threat of danger everywhere you go. So, like in America, we'll still live our daily lives as we are, but there's still that potentiality that you're going to get a knock on the door. There's that potentiality that you're going to get arrested by plainclothes police officers because you said something a foreign country didn't like. There's like all of that is already happening to directly answer your question. I don't think it's coming at a future date. I think it's a matter of how intense it'll get. It's already here and it's been here for a long time.
You know,
Yeah.
more just like a social engineering. And if we keep going along with it and not realizing it's not going to be like you're saying, bam, 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 this is when it's
Yeah.
implemented, this is that. It's more of this,
Like incremental.
yeah, the incremental.
It's cooking the frog slowly.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, to use that analogy, that's exactly what it is.
And it's kind of hard to pinpoint exactly what it is unless you break it down like that.
Yes, and a great example of that is an example that all of us know very well is that was 2019, 2020 with COVID. I
Yeah.
mean, if you would have had a time machine and you would have you would have gone back in time and told people in 2019 this is what's going to happen over the next 4 years, a lot of people, including people on the left and people on the right, they would have said you're totally crazy. You're not going to be able to get people to behave that way and treat each other that way and divorce their husbands and wives and break up with with their girlfriends and boyfriends and get
Yeah.
rid of their friends that they've known for 20 years. People think you're crazy, but look at how that happened. And there was no singular point where that happened. It was a slow incremental process that developed, unfolded.
Yeah. And where have we seen this before? That exact type of scenario where people are, you know, they get the program in, and then all of a sudden, people are turning against each other when we shouldn't be. Like, where have we seen that before? I'm sure there's lots of things throughout history we've, where that's happened. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, for sure. You're right. It's all throughout human history. That's all human history is that kind of thing. I always go and look at Roman history. I look at I really like the book Edward Gibbon's Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire, and I've used that for a lot of my shows, as you guys probably know, because there's so much in that book that is so relevant to what's happening today. And you hear people say things. It's in our pop culture. America's like Rome. I don't know if the people that say that just offhand understand what that actually means. Like I did a show recently to answer your question here. I did a show recently where I compared some of the, you could call it extravagancies perhaps, of Roman emperors like Caligula. That name has it's kind of synonymous with total psychopath.
Mhm.
But if you look at what Caligula did, for example, in appointing his horse as a consul, there's some debate on whether or not he was very serious about that and was like talking to the horse and, hey, what's your advice? I don't think that's what he was doing. Some historians might paint it that way. But then there's the other angle that he was doing that to mock the Senate and to show them that, like, you have no power. I can literally appoint a horse to my council, and you're not going to be able to do anything about it. And it also, of course, mocks the citizenry too. And I compared that to what the Biden administration did with having their little rainbow half naked parties on the White House lawn, hiring this whatever he or she was to run part of the energy department, the cross dresser that stole women's clothing that was in charge of nuclear waste. I mean, that is the equivalent of making your horse council, because it's showing the public we can literally appoint a cross-dressing psychopath who's mentally ill to deal with nuclear waste. We can literally have naked people running around the White House lawn. We can literally focus and make the entire political left concerned with chopping people's genitals off or chemically castrating them. What are you going to do about that? Nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. And then they make you sound crazy if you try to resist it. And I would argue the same thing for the Trump administration. I mean, you just saw the party they had at Mar-a-Lago, women dancing and half naked inside of giant like champagne glasses, and it's basically like if you watch that movie Caligula, which is like a softcore pornography, but if you watch that movie Caligula, it doesn't matter if it's ancient Rome or if it's modern day America. It's the same kind of thing. There's reasons for that, largely because the people that become emperor, the people that become president, tend to grow up in lives of luxury already, lives of disconnect from the outside world, and they're already accustomed to those lifestyles. I mean, look at Hunter Biden, for example. Look at the way that those stories were swept under the rug by the administration. Now it's all well known. It was just a cocaine fueled orgy all the time. Everything that Hunter Biden did was, would be, historically speaking, compared to like how a Roman emperor behaved: drugs, sex, partying. But he's connected to the most powerful man in the country, and nobody can do anything about it. And I guess to get to the root core of your question about how you referenced history, like how all of this stuff happens in history. If you looked at, I think this Roman example is so good. When you look at like a Caligula, And you looked at a Nero, or you looked at a Domitian, or whoever these emperors are that I was talking about on my show as some examples of what's compared them to what's happening today. A lot of the stuff that they were doing, it's not a matter of like comparing it and saying, oh, it's kind of like what Trump or what Biden did. It's kind of like what these guys were doing. It's the exact same thing. It's people that have too much power. There's no check on that power. It's people that if you were to read the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, you would learn that it kind of surprised me a little bit because of probably the pop culture and the maybe not brainwashing, but the conditioning to look at history a certain way. It usually wasn't the emperor or the Senate that caused the problems in Rome. It was the people. There were lots of emperors that tried to do the right thing. There were lots of senates that tried to do the right thing. And whether they were stifled by the emperor or stifled by other members of the Senate or stifled by the Praetorian Guard or stifled by the military, often and more often than not, from my assessment, having read a lot of Roman history, it was the people that rebelled against it. When the emperor said we're going to try to fix or figure these problems out, the people rebelled. When it was the Senate that said we're going to try to fix and figure these problems out, it was the people that rebelled. A lot of this comes down to, I mean, you can see it's kind of disturbing to see it up close, but you can see this in the transition of how the crazy liberal left still there, but now the crazy liberal left in terms of who gets the most attention and what kind of crazy stories you see in the news, it's transitioning to the political right now. Now the political right is embracing all the same talking points. They're covering up for the same things that they covered up for Biden, but they're covering up for Trump. Trump's got cue cards. He probably had a stroke. He's having secret MRIs. He's doing the exact same things Biden did. He's promoting the destruction of the Houthis through drone bombing. It's a separate issue, but like you said, Biden was crazy for doing that, and then he did literally the same thing. They're talking about forgiving student loans, and now the Republicans are all just defending that. So it's not even really like a left wing, right wing political thing. It's a mob of people that are trying to defend the political system, whatever it is, that is in power, that makes them feel as if they're empowered, as if they're in control, and whatever they're getting from that, a swollen head or free this or free that from the government,
No.
that's the payoff. And so historically, it's a thing that we constantly and consistently see because it's human nature. It's human nature. And I think that's the root core of most of our problems. Not that human nature is inherently evil or wrong, but we have to have a society where we teach people some version of morality and ethics at a young age. And every society is not perfect, but Japan's not perfect, but I use Japan as an example for a lot of things because I live over here. And you could look at, example, the school lunch system. Most of it's sourced local, most of it's prepared by hand. Not every school's like that, of course. But if the Japanese can do that, why can't the Americans do that? If they can do it with less money and arguably less resources, why can't the country that has the most money and the most resources not get better food to kids? It's the same thing with healthcare over here. It's the same thing with the streets being clean. It's the same. It boils down to culture. It boils down to what kids are taught when they're young. And unfortunately, we've abandoned, I think, most of that in America. And I think that's why we get, again, going back to your question, I think that's why these things keep repeating in history because people get lazy.
Yeah.
People think, everything's perfect. I don't have to do anything to maintain this. And then things collapse.
Yeah.
I know I'm sorry for rambling and ranting. I hope that makes sense.
That makes sense. So it's a sign that we as a society are detached and the basic needs are met and we kind of lose touch to you know what's going on in the politics on the screen is kind of a reflection of what's going on in our own society.
Yeah, good way to summarize it.
Yeah.
So is Japan, I know you're in Japan, so you have a unique perspective on it. Is the digital ID coming to Japan? Are they doing the same things that Western countries are doing with the UN agenda, or is Japan not allowing those things to happen?
As I said, such a complicated answer to that question. It's a great question. I might even myself do a full show on that. Um, it's weird because there's a lot of things. I'll try to keep this simple so I don't just ramble on. Uh, I think that Japan is such a great example of a lot of these questions and a lot of these topics because if you were to think about technology, for example, in the United States, whatever the new technology is, that eventually within a short period of time becomes the dominant technology. So if the new phone comes out, after a few generations of that phone, you can't really use the old phones anymore. They stop providing service. You can't use this. You can't. I don't know enough about this to speak as an expert, but I know that I've always had an old phone and it doesn't last as long as I'd like it to because the services are no longer provided and it just doesn't work. Over here in Japan, there's like a giant um, there's a there's a giant difference. So instead of having like very specific technologies that become the dominant in society, technology over here is like you can still go buy auxiliary corded headphone like old MP3 players, or you can get like things that look like they were made for Star Trek. You can buy like rad counters on the street. You can buy old things that are like from the 80s, or you can buy things that again look like they're from a science fiction movie. So there's like a gigantic selection of technologies. I'm using technology specifically because if we're talking about digital IDs and cameras and spying and all that kind of stuff. So it's weird because in Japan you have such a vast array of options, but yet it's still relatively cash centric here. They still use fax machines here. Not everybody, but fax machines are still used here. I go down to the city hall where I live. I don't live in Tokyo, but I live in a decent sized city. And the city hall, they have computers, but they also have stacks of like old yellow papers everywhere that they still go through, and they go through these little. It's all a lot of it's done through paper. But they also have like 100 people working all the time at any job, so it's an exaggeration, but like enough people working that there's usually never an issue with efficiency. So I'm trying to think of other good examples of that. It's the same thing with like food. There's some things here that people eat that are inspired by Western foods. You got your Burger Kings, your fast foods, but they also eat far smaller portions of them. So there's a lot of cultural differences that even if I walk down the street and I see quite often, as a matter of fact, I see little tiny signs on construction sites that say abiding, it'll have it in Japanese and English, abiding by the UN sustainability goals. And I see that and like I freeze up. I'm like, really? Abiding by the UN sustainability goals? But then I think about my toilet in my house and I think, you know, it's weird because Japan will do things that just are really reasonable. Like when I flush my toilet, it has water that comes down into a little sink. And so I can wash my hands, and then the water from washing my hands, which is clean, then goes down into the toilet and fills it up. I mean, that's just really efficient. But that would be a solution in the US that would be sold to the public as this is going to save us water and save the planet. The Japanese just do this because it naturally makes sense. So I don't know. Is that inspired by a green agenda, or is that just a logical thing? There's a university in Tokyo that created a plastic that just dissolves in water, and I could be wrong. I think they made it out of seaweed or something to do with seaweed. That just makes logical sense. If that was done in the U.S., it would be sold to us as fighting climate change.
Yeah.
So I'll give you another quick example, not to change the subject, but I think it's an interesting example. There's a story from World War II where the Germans were trying to convince the Japanese that if there's any Jews in Japan, get rid of them. Jews are dangerous. And the Germans kept constantly pushing this on Japan and telling like, you need to watch out. These people are dangerous. And the Japanese said, okay, sure. And they didn't really care much about it. But the Japanese compiled a plan. I think it was called the Fugu Plan, where they said, instead of saying we hate or we like these Jews, they said, actually, what are the Germans saying these people do? They make a lot of money. They like money. How about we enslave a bunch of them in little territories and make them make money for us? like it's innovative. Call it anti-Semitic, call it whatever, but it's like a weird, innovative little. I've never read anything else like that about history. I thought that was really interesting when I read that. So it's like an innovative way to deal with it. And so if you're looking at like these environmental sustainability goals in Japan, I feel like even if something's motivated by them, they just find a solution to it. And it's not billions and billions and billions of dollars and multiple presidential administrations and congresses to get something so simple like let's just make a plastic that dissolves in water that's made of natural things. Let's just save water by having the water that you wash your hands with fill the toilet. It's very, very common sense stuff. So there's a lot of that in Japan, but I can't tell if it's motivated by the UN or if it's motivated just by the natural evolution of technology and innovation here. It's the same kind of a thing when you look at, um, I mean, you look at the train systems here in Japan. They've had these things since the 60s over here. They've hardly had any accidents or any problems with them. And look at California, where you guys live. How much money did your state spend on a high-speed rail system? 17 billion, and they barely laid any track for it. Japan built that train back in the 60s for a fraction of that with inflation adjustments. And California's like, we're not really sure how to do that in 2025. Is that sabotage? I don't know. I don't know. But like, if you really wanted to help the environment, just build trains that are safe and clean and efficient, so people aren't in their cars all the time. Just as an example, or I don't know, enforce the law so buses aren't so dangerous. It's just that there's a lot of weird. I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you guys. I
Oh
don't
yeah,
mean
that
to
makes
ramble.
sense.
It's a different way of handling things and looking at the world.
Yeah, it's like over here, everything has to be all tied up and into this or that, or always has to be some sort of agenda or some way to capitalize on, way to make money, or just gets twisted and then makes it not simple, simple solutions like you're saying.
It's almost like I kind of got the impression that whatever the motivation is, a lot of Japanese companies, which are international, so that's probably why they adopt the UN agenda to some. It's a very small number that I've seen, but I see it sometimes. It might be that, like the World War II Jewish question of Germany, they told the Japanese that, and the Japanese were like, huh, okay, well, how can we benefit from that? How can we streamline that? How can we streamline the fact that Jews are good at making money? It might be that it's like they adopt the UN policy, but like, okay, they're telling us that we need alternatives to plastic. We need to save water. We already do a lot of that. And then they just create the solution. Here's the solution. And the world's like, well, we've been working on this for years and we can't figure that out. How'd you figure that out? So it might be one of those. It's almost like it makes me, and I'm sure you guys feel the same way. It makes me feel like it's not a byproduct of ignorance or stupidity or bad policy. It's a byproduct of intentional sabotage of American society and of our culture and of our governments. Like these people that run your state and other, they know what they're doing. They're not stupid. It is a plan. It is an agenda to destroy the very fabric of society.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So that brings us to our next question. So we just saw Larry Fink, with BlackRock, say we are at the beginning of tokenization of all assets. Basically, you'll own nothing and be happy. Who will own these tokens, and when will this be implemented across the world?
Okay, so as I answer that, I wanted to put a final note on the previous subject
Oh, sounds
because
good.
the question you had originally asked was about the digital ID in Japan, and I guess the point of what I was getting at was that whether or not they implement something specifically called the digital ID. I mean, they have a My Number card over here, which is like a separate ID card that I have. I don't think there's a microchip in it. So I don't know if it's technically digital. I really don't know for sure. But I think that if they did implement something like that, it would be handled completely differently than it would be anywhere else. Because if you were to tell people in Japan, you don't have this, you can't go to the store, that's going to cause a huge social backlash. And that's just not tolerated in the culture here. So if they did implement something like this, like very specifically a digital ID like what they have in the UK or what they have in China, I think one, it would be rejected culturally. And if they were able to implement it otherwise, maybe it is the My Number card that they have, it's going to be dealt with in a completely different way and probably a much more efficient way. And it's not going to look anything like you see in the West. At least that's my assessment. That's just my opinion. I don't know for sure, but they handle things so differently here and so uniquely. It's probably not going to look like the full blown disasters that you get in Vietnam or in California. But okay, back to your question about, what was it, Larry Fink?
Yeah, so Larry Fink basically said that we're at the beginning of tokenizations of all assets. So what that makes me think is basically you'll own nothing and be happy because you have these tokens instead of money in real estate. So I guess my question to you is who will own these tokens and when will this be implemented across the world?
I don't know much about or anything about the tokens. I get the idea of what you're asking though, because I know quite a bit about Larry Fink, and now I don't know if he's directly, but he's indirectly running the World Economic Forum too. I do know that the idea of owning nothing and being happy, that originally it wasn't even Klaus Schwab's statement. It was another woman that worked for the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab embraced it, but this whole idea is very clearly, embodied in the Larry Fink BlackRock model, which is that they own everything, and then they tell you that you're happy. But we could use Japan as another example of that. I think it's really important to recognize, culturally speaking. I mean, you guys live in California. It's a big state. Things are big in like Texas. Things are big in Texas, big in California. As Americans, and I grew up in America, lived in America my whole life. We're used to big. We're used to a lot. We're used to excess, whether that's good or bad. So if, for example, if you were to come over here to Japan and see how I live, most of my possessions are are in this room with me. My radio equipment and the big bookshelf behind me. Other than my clothes and some dishes, this is like all that I own pretty much. And this would be considered pretty, I guess you could say, poor, or it's not that it's just things that I like and I don't have a lot of other stuff, but people would consider that to probably that I would have nothing. How could you be happy with having so little? So part of that is cultural. So like I think when Americans look at like Klaus Schwab or Larry Fink and this idea that you'll own nothing, you'll be happy. Everything will be based on renting. You won't actually physically own anything. You have to rent everything. A lot of that is the fear of that is definitely motivated by American lifestyles, which probably more than anybody else in the world are are lived in abundance. So we're going to be worried about, every little thing that we own being replaced, everything that we own having to be quote rented. But if you go to a lot of countries, people that are poorer or people that just choose to live simply, it wouldn't affect them as much. It wouldn't have as much. So I think, first of all, that's an important perspective to have. I'm not saying it's good or bad. I don't really, it doesn't matter how many things people have to me. I'm happy the way that my life is. But I think that's, first of all, an important perspective to have. But the second thing I'll say is that process of the tokens, however Larry Fink explains that, is another one of those things that, like the digital ID and like everything else, will be like the social credit score, is a slow incremental process where it'll be slowly implemented as the culture changes. And I don't think that it's going to be one of those things, as we've said several times, where it's like an overnight shift or an overnight switch or an overnight change. It'll be slowly implemented, slowly integrated. I mean, how many people have digital smartwatches? And if you would have introduced those to people 20 years ago, I mean, it would not only would have been science fiction, but people might have been a lot more concerned back in the, we'll say 25 years ago, back in the 90s, people would have been a lot more concerned with privacy. And now we're not as concerned with privacy. It takes a little bit of time to convince people that you don't need privacy. It takes a little bit of time to convince people, you don't need the old analog way of doing things. Here's a better and new way of doing things. And whether that's natural evolution or it's something partly synthetic, it is a slow mechanism by which that the idea of those tokens you're talking about will be implemented and integrated into society. Look at Bitcoin. At first, that was like suspicious. The banks said we don't like it. Turns out a lot of the banks were behind. JP Morgan, I think, was the main one behind promoting it initially. And now, like Bitcoin is, I mean, in the quote alternative communities of radio and the internet, I can't even get onto Rumble unless I take payment in Bitcoin. I don't know if it's like that everywhere, but like so like it's something so otherwise that would have been rejected has become such a part of the culture that now in the alternative media and the alternative world where people are concerned about the digital ID and mark of the beast, now they're taking digital currency. How did we get to
I
that
agree
point?
with you. Yeah, and I remember you telling me that you didn't like Bitcoin. So I just want to get your thoughts on cryptocurrency itself.
Yeah, sure. It's pretty simple. I don't trust it. And it's not even that it's a conspiracy or some evil plot by the New World Order. It's just I don't trust things unless I can hold them in my hand, usually. Which I think is part of the reason they still like cash over here in Japan because they like to hold things in their hand. They like to be in control of things. They also like privacy over here. And that's built in, it's kind of integrated into the culture. And it used to be integrated into the culture in the US, right? Like in the 90s, when I grew up in the 90s, everybody was all about privacy all the time, like privacy, privacy, privacy. And that's been completely beaten out of our culture to now we're at the point where if you want privacy, people look at you and think, what do you got to hide? Why would you want to have privacy? So, so the cryptocurrency, it's sold as if it's like a private thing that can't be tracked, can't be traced, like the transactions. That's totally not true. It absolutely can. And it might be a little difficult to do it, but you can track the transactions. And the FBI has already been doing this for certain criminal cases, and now they just get AI to do it. And they can go through the whole. I don't know technically what it's called, but the blockchain. I'm not exactly sure what the name of it is, but they can go through all this with AI, and they can find out exactly who's using what, who's paying for what. It's weird that I mean, at the very least, regardless of what my opinion is, it's it's weird that you've had the people who have embraced this the most are the people that have been the most vocal over the last few decades about digital currency and the quote mark of the beast and all that. Now they're the ones that are promoting digital currency, cryptocurrency, and there's a fallacy involved in the justification for it. Well, I made money with it. Well, that's great. You can make money selling drugs too. You can make money prostituting yourself. That doesn't mean that it's a moral, ethical, or the right thing to do. And if you made money ethically on it, great. I don't want anything to do with it. And I don't want to be compelled to use it if I want to use an alternative media platform like Rumble. I tried to do Rumble because people have been begging me to put at least one show up there. I tried to sign up for it. They won't let me on unless I accept payment in Bitcoin. So that's the whole quote slave system that all the conservative, all the Christian, all the conspiracy people have been screaming about for since I was a child, and now they're the ones more than anybody else who embrace it. That's like I think that's kind of the definition of like how Satan manipulates people, isn't it? It's very weird. So that's why I don't like it. I don't trust it. And I don't trust how the people who have been most opposed to it have been manipulated subtly to accept it more than anybody else. That's why I don't like it and don't trust it.
How do you think I mean, because I've seen it in like my own, friends like that, the same thing. They're really against the beast system and, talking about that. But then, you know,
They
they're
like some
really
Bitcoin.
into crypto. Like I have a buddy super into crypto, but he's always talking about the mark of the beast. And I'm like, man, isn't the crypto? He's like, well, oh man, I'm making some money on it. I'm like, well, there's
Yeah.
that, I guess. But how do you think that subconscious transition that people who maybe normally would have, like you were saying, be against this type of thing, how did it get into them? Like it's kind of hard to
It's a
say.
good question. It's a good question, and we could speculate on it. I don't know. If you want my opinion, I give you my opinion. What do you guys think, though?
I think they just slowly got into the beast system. I think there's so much propaganda out there saying how great cryptocurrency is. Oh, your private keys is private. You're not using the government money. There's just so much propaganda in the
If
media
the
that
right
people
people say it that they like,
they,
or
they
whoever it is,
and
then
they
they'll get more behind it, maybe.
yeah, and they pay people this crypto if they start saying how it's great. Like my friend, I have a friend, I'm not gonna name his name, but he does YouTube videos. And actually, he was making videos with a guy who makes a really big channel. And then all of a sudden, this guy makes his own big crypto coin, his own crypto coin, gets everybody to buy it. And then all of a sudden, he says he loses all his crypto. Then that's what they do when they say they're gonna get rid of your crypto. So that way he made a whole bunch of money off it, and then everybody else lost all their money with this
Oh,
crypto pump and dump.
yeah, another pump and dump scam. Yeah, that's or like that Hawk 2 girl. She did
Yeah.
the same thing. No, yeah, and I'm sure that people that like crypto would, based on our conversation, have all sorts of things to say about how to defend it. And I've heard all those things because I've done a lot of crypto shows over the years where I just trash it, and people are confused. I thought you were alternative media. It's like, well, so I have to conform to a certain way of looking at the world, and I have to support these, these new things that are introduced.
Mental gymnastics.
It's mental gymnastics, and it also shows you that so much of whatever it is that people consider to be alternative from the mainstream media or mainstream politics or mainstream whatever is a lot of times, I don't know if this is the best term, but for lack of a better term, a controlled opposition. I mean, I remember sitting in a radio studio in 2010, 2011, it might have been in Orlando. And I remember reading an article vividly. I remember sitting in the studio reading an article about how cryptocurrency, which was really first starting to just kind of be introduced, was being backed by JP Morgan. And I remember, I think I talked about it on that show. It was 15 years ago, so I have no idea where that show is in my archive. But I remember talking about that and reading that article. Hard as hell to find anything referencing that anymore. But the big banks originally were behind, or at least one big bank was behind cryptocurrency. They were pushing cryptocurrency. I think that was my initial introduction into, and then when it first became more widespread and more used, I kept thinking back to that article I read about JP Morgan. It's like, why would I support something that the big banks that we're supposed to be fighting against or supposed to be opposed to are backing? Which is that like the Wall Street protests. The people would take money from, their organizations and they would just deposit it into the banks that they were protesting. How do you make any change when you're doing that?
Exactly. Yeah.
I guess like with like my generation, the appeal with crypto is, we've seen parents, make, wealth through stocks or, I think we kind of see it as like, oh, our new opportunity to,
Your
you
generation's opportunity.
build wealth or something. Oh, these banks are getting into this Bitcoin or whatever. We gotta get into it, in the beginning stages. So maybe when we're X amount old, we'll, have wealth. Like, it's there's that too. But then you're buying into something that you don't know, you know.
You're right. I'm sure that a lot of people probably see it that way.
Yeah.
And, people could rightfully, and I encourage them to criticize my assessment of it because I don't care to participate in it. I don't want to learn any more about it than I already know. But I know that some people can benefit from it. And of course, some people can use that to diversify their portfolios. But from a philosophical point of view, it then becomes a question of is that the motivating um, factor that you're trying to just make money?
Yep.
If you're just trying to make money and that comes first and foremost, then I guess that's a great way if you know how to utilize that. But that's obviously not the only thing that matters in life. And it's kind of like I have this experience with my radio show too, where people will ask me, why aren't you on like a X radio network or whatever? First of all, it's because I've been kicked off of so many, but I'll say because it's better to be independent. I don't have anybody tell me what I'm doing. Well, then you're not successful unless you're not on X network. It's like, well, that's not how do you define success? It's a really basic philosophical idea, but it goes that way with success. It goes that way with money. And it goes that way as well with those sustainability goals. And like I said, that and what the World Economic Forum has advocated for, I know for sure would not have, if you could implement those things, like just say they're implemented, snap of a finger, it would not affect people over here where I live as much as it affects Americans because most people here don't have cars. They live in very small little places anyway because of the lack of space. Most people don't, I mean, it's air conditioners aren't even like a gigantic thing over here. Like people already live in a very simplified lifestyle. So if you implemented those policies, snap of a finger, it's not going to affect a large part of the world, which then makes you think, okay, it might be geared toward America, and it's probably has something to do with like draining the remainder of the wealth out of the country and subjugating the population of what used to be a nation of free thinkers. So that's probably part of it as well. But we have to ask those questions about like, well, is money the motivating factor? How do you define wealth? How do you define success? Silly questions for some people, but important and necessary nonetheless.
Yeah, I definitely think for the elites who run us, it's power is the motivating factor. And that actually brings me to my next question. Uh, do you think technocrats want to replace humans with machines? And how will the elites continue to lower the population of humans across the world?
Well, it's a broad question because clearly there is an agenda to, if not replace, merge human beings physically, biologically with machines. There's no doubt about that. I think that everybody knows that for sure at this point. In terms of what the motivation is, I agree with you that power is definitely part of this. But I think going beyond that, I've come to think that some of it's not necessarily power. I think some of it's more ritualistic in the sense of like people essentially how do I say this? Developing a technology or advocating for a technology that basically sacrifices human lives to something that feels a little bit otherworldly. So like, yeah, it's power, it's control, smart dust that can read your heart rate and I think they can attach that smart dust to pretty much every organ in your body and get a real time readout. Uh, from smart dust to microchips to RFK Jr. wanting people to wear digital little tracking devices for their quote health.
Good point.
Um, all of those, there's an incremental process of like if you're wearing something and merging with machines in that way, they call that a wearable. That's you can take it off. Then there's fusibles, and then we start replacing parts of the body with, well, like completely synthetic, completely artificial parts. And then you kind of become a cyborg. And then there's the whole argument of like trying to merge human consciousness with essentially like a software program. I don't think that you can actually do that. But there's a lot of different elements to the broadness of that question and that idea. At the underlying core of it, I think it's important to point out, besides the power, that I think a lot of this is almost religious for these people. I'll give you just a quick example. You probably heard me mention Curtis Yarvin before on this show. Curtis Yarvin he calls himself the Dark Elf. I don't know how anybody takes this guy seriously, but the vice president, J.D. Vance, gets his philosophy from the Dark Elf. Literally, he calls himself the Dark Elf. He's like a Jewish magician. And he advocates for a techno monarchy. He wants the U.S., to be controlled by a technocratic monarchy, like a technocratic king, which is what they've bred J.D. Vance to be, make no mistake about it, through his Palantir CIA connections. But the point is, I don't think for people like Curtis Yarvin, it's necessarily about power. I think it's about serving a higher authority or a lower authority. It's about serving something other than what is human. So like if it's just power, they want to just control things. For people like Curtis Yarvin and people like Peter Thiel, it clearly goes beyond just power. I know that wasn't like the root of your question, but just based on what you said, I think that it goes into a far different category. It's not just human psychology and controlling people and things like this. It's about something more supernatural. I think it's about
And you
something more
really
spiritual.
believe in something else, it seems like that what do you think through, these technologies they're accessing? Because the way they act and, it seems like they are like worshiping something, like you're saying, supernatural.
Otherworldly or yeah.
And it really makes me think that I mean, what do you think about like another intelligence that maybe they could be accessing through like, the quantum computers, D-Wave, that type of thing. Maybe, there's been talk like on your beginning of your show, Jordy Rose talking about, the D-Wave and the altar of an alien god. And he said a lot of other stuff that he really seems like he believes it, that maybe they're accessing something that we really can't comprehend, or maybe it's all show and ritual, or I don't know. What's your thought?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite subjects because there's a lot to play with here. If you looked at the history of NASA, the history of NASA is not, quote, science. The history of NASA is, quote, I guess people might call it pseudoscience, magic, ritual, famous Jack Parson experiments where he would recite poems to the goat god Pan and then launch his rockets. It was, I mean, which are magically speaking, they're phallic, so there's a sexual ritual component to it, which ties in with Aleister Crowley and the California lodges and the sex magic and rituals of that. No time to go into the details of that, but that is what has largely been behind a lot of quote science and technological developments, even with the Manhattan Project. I mean, the Manhattan Project, um, it's not like if you went to one of the Manhattan Project laboratory websites, like Oak Ridge, it's not like they're going to say this in the same terminology, but in theme and symbolically, they had a container that was placed when they tested the Trinity bomb, a container that was placed there in case the bomb didn't fully detonate to make sure that the material, the nuclear radioactive material, didn't just go all over the place. They wanted to contain it in case the bomb malfunctioned. Well, in alchemy, if you're thinking of it literally, when you're trying to create the homunculus, the little person trying to essentially invoke or create this new being, you have a separate vessel, and that's how you draw the spirit or the energy in. That's how you draw the thing that you're trying to conjure in, and you do it with, like Frankenstein's monster, you do it with an enormous jolt of energy, atomic bomb splitting the atom, a container to catch the remnants. I mean, it's very alchemical, at least symbolically. And all alchemy is historically, whether you take it to be literal or figurative or both, or spiritual alchemy or whatever the case is, it's probably a mixture of all that. Historically, alchemy was science. Historically, myth was science. Historically, magic was psychology, because magic is the directing of your will and understanding how the mind works, right? So when we think of like what Jordy Rose talked about, my friend, the late Kev Baker, I don't know if you guys ever heard of Kev Baker. He interviewed Jordy Rose and he asked him about those comments he had made about the computer, alien altar, and the Lovecraftian stuff. And I think that interview is still on YouTube. You can probably find it for free. I think Rose kind of backpedaled a tiny bit on what he had said, but the idea is still there. And clearly, when IBM built their computer, their quantum computer, which is called the Q, by the way. So there's a little bit of the QAnon stuff we could probably talk about in another show. The Q computer, they built it into the form of what looks like an altar to the planet Saturn. They built it into a giant black cube, and they made it look very like this black glossy material that almost made it look like a black liquid inside of
Oh,
it.
is that what the Muslims do their
Yeah,
ritual?
like at Mecca.
Black
Yeah.
cube.
It's the same exact symbolism, precisely. Yes.
Goes for Saturn.
Yeah, it relates largely to Saturn because Saturn's the god of architecture. He created the universe. He's the god of time, of space. Tarot card. He's not Saturn, but the devil. El Diablo sits on the black cube. Humans are chained to it. It's a lot more metaphor than it is literalism, but yes, that's precisely right. And it's not just the Muslims. They find, I believe Manly Hall wrote about this in I think it was South America. They also found that some of the people there were worshiping black, well, essentially black box, black cube. But it had, because in Mecca, it's a meteorite. So people worship the things that fell from the sky. I mean, in Egypt, they used to make daggers or ritual element like athames out of meteorites that would fall down from heaven because it was divine. It was from above. So it's Saturn. It's also what comes from above as a divine blessing. So they make things out of it. They worship it. That's definitely part of it. To get to the core of the question and the answer in terms of, because there's so many things we could talk about here. It's really overwhelming. But in terms of like the magical, the ritual element of it and what these people worship, I think that at the core of it, you could look at it from the point of view of, I don't know if you guys are familiar at all with like Black European grimoires, how to summon spirits, things that were largely usually written by people that they were writing things in code, or it was people that were insane, or it was the church. Sometimes the church would publish things like this. The idea of like black magic, the idea of using some sort of ritual magic to literally conjure and summon something. I mean, the Queen of England did this. John Dee and Edward Kelly famously, the angel script, angel magic, which ties in with Crowley and Jack Parsons and all that. Okay, but the point is, when you're looking at the history of black magic and the history of demonic possession or the conjuring of demons and making deals with the devil at the crossroads, this doesn't have to be taken literally, but just symbolically speaking. When you make that deal with the devil, whether you're signing a contract, like the story of Urban Granger, in blood, in Latin, in reverse, or you're simply making a verbal agreement with the devil. I want to be a really famous whatever. I want to be really successful, whatever. And then in exchange, you sell your soul, like Bob Dylan. He made a deal with the chief operator of another world, or however he put it, to 60 Minutes. So when you do that, the stories and the myths and the traditions are, the devil doesn't usually keep his end of the bargain, or the demon doesn't really keep their end of the bargain. They're a trickster. It's a trickster element, right? So the demon or the devil is always trying to find a way to make your payment of your soul due early. So they're always trying to trip you up. They're always trying to make you fail, so that rather than 15 years of fame and fortune, whatever you make a deal for, maybe you get 6 or 7, and then something tragic happens, which kind of makes you start to think, when you see a lot of that stuff in Hollywood where people are just so successful, so much money, so much power, so much influence, and then one day they just suddenly they've got like a terrible disease, like hell, Bruce Willis. He's got dementia, and then he's done. I'm not saying he made a deal with the
Something
devil.
comes out, they're humiliated or something happens.
Precisely. Yeah, some kind of humiliation. I'm not saying Bruce Willis made a deal with the devil. I'm saying that it's that kind of thing happens so often that it makes you start to, and it's probably those types of things that led to the myths of black magic and the summoning and conjuring of demons and making of deals. So the point is, the magicians in the lore who would make these deals because they knew the devil was a trickster,
Mhm.
they would do things to try to extend the life of the contract, or to extend their own life, because it was going to be cut short. Whether that was because they knew the devil was going to trick them, or it was because the contract that they had signed, if you will, was up. They'd spent 15 years at whatever they were really good at, and now the devil came to collect his due. So these people would start doing really horrific things. They would make a new agreement with the devil. Look, don't take my soul to me. So I'll do anything you want me to do. Just let me live a little bit longer. The devil says, okay, you have to sacrifice an infant once a month, and you have to pour the blood out to me. Kidnap a child, kill them to me, and you get to live another year. That's the lore of it anyway. And I think that's part of what is happening in Hollywood and also in the tech industry, because these people are dealing with things that are very powerful. And with AI, they don't even know how the thing works. I don't think it's AI. I think it's ancient intelligence, not artificial intelligence. And so the last point is, and then I'm sorry, I'll let you guys, final questions. We can go a few minutes longer. The final point is that whether it's something like that. Or maybe it's they want to live a little bit longer. They make a new deal with the devil, or it's part of their initial agreement, if you will. And that new deal is if you can plug 1,000 souls into this machine, well, you can live a little bit longer. So they get the technology, they get the know how, they build this machine, they plug people into it figuratively and literally. And then you've got so many people that have made these deals with the devil, if you will, that it ultimately becomes the goal to create because the devil's working in so many different ways, create a whole system where basically the whole of humanity is sacrificed to save the lives of a few people who made a deal with the devil. Again, figuratively, symbolically, and possibly literally to some extent or to some degree. But that's how I look at it. I look at it from like a black magic demonic pact point of view. And I think that that's a really good way to assess who these people are and what they do and what they believe.
So do you think they want to make basically an AI god then?
I think that they're summoning or conjuring, quote, an AI god. I don't I think that whatever it is that they're playing with, like in the stories of demonic pacts, most of the time the stuff that you get anyway is a trick. Even if the devil does actually give you something, usually there's a trick involved. And so maybe these people think that, oh, we have the ability to develop a super intelligence. But then, as they admit, we don't know how it works. We have no idea how it's essentially thinking for itself. It's trying to blackmail the scientists. It's showing signs of sentience. Like they're starting to realize. I mean, Musk has known this for a long time, and he said it. Like they have essentially made a pact with the devil. They've agreed to unleash this horrible thing for power and wealth and control, and they think that they can have a little bit of control over it. And the first thing that monster, that demon destroys is its creator. There's a great example of that in the movie Alien Prometheus. I think it was Prometheus movie where Wayland spends trillions of dollars to meet his maker, and the first thing the alien does is look at him really weird, look at David the robot, and then he just kills him. And that's pretty much what these people are doing. They're not going to get anything out of that deal, but they will destroy the lives of billions of souls probably in the process if we allow them to continue to do what they're doing.
So, like you said, when they're pressed and asked how these things work, it's like they don't have a full grasp on it, how exactly it works, which makes me feel, and we're kind of going off in, other
That's
territory.
fine. It's fine.
It makes me think that, that this technology has been slowly seeded, in our, whoever it is. I mean, I think there's been a lot of people throughout history that have received, groundbreaking things through a dream or a vision or, and it makes me think that we've slowly have been seeded and or we're like creating this technology for something else, not, and almost feels like to me that it wants a vessel through something that we are creating for it. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh, it makes perfect sense. Yeah, I've talked about that before. I think that's part of what the whole AI system and all the not technology, but certain forms of technology. I think that that's definitely what it's being used for. I mean, if anything, the quantum computers that they've developed are basically like they're just kind of like gateways or portals for something to come through, to walk through, to step through. And the people that are willing to connect themselves to all of this, quite literally in some cases, but figuratively in others, they're just willing vessels. They're batteries that power the system, yeah, or they're offerings to it. In another way, they're kind of like an offering.
Yeah. Well, that so you basically said these people who make these packs, billions of people are gonna die. So what is the elite's plan, and what do they plan on achieving by 2030? Like what's really that what they want to achieve, these elites?
Well, I didn't say die, but I said sacrificing maybe the integrity of the souls, because I think that's what was happening. That's a more horrific thing than death. I mean, death is one thing,
Right.
but
Yeah.
compromising the soul is worse. I think that's what's really being targeted. It's like a harvesting of souls. But I get the general idea of your question for sure. 2030 has always been the idea. It was 20. The Agenda 21 was like the 21st century. They've put a date on 2030. If you go down the list, I pulled up the list just to have it here with me, but if you go down the list of what the 2030 goals are, or the 17 goals for sustainability, more than magic and demons and all of that, and control and power, if you look at those 17 goals for sustainability, they're basically just the communist planks. It's just the communist manifesto. And they all sound really great, right? Like no more poverty. Well, you know how you can get rid of poverty? You just kill all the people that don't have money and don't have anything. If you kill everybody who's homeless and kill everybody who's in poverty, there's no more poverty or homelessness. There's just people that have things and people that are dead. And that's basically what communism does. Like they say, no more hunger. Well, if you kill people that are hungry, nobody's hungry anymore. It's a great way to deal with it. I'm not saying that the UN or people that are promoting SDGs are going to kill people so they're not hungry. I'm saying that the system that they create ultimately cultivates the conditions where that's what ends up happening. Like with Mao's communism in China, they certainly killed a lot of people, but initially it was, let's reorganize the farms, let's reorganize the industry. We're going to put people who know how to farm into metal factories, put people that know how to deal with metal onto farms, and it just destroys everything. And then eventually food isn't growing, and then people start starving to death. And communism more often than not kills indirectly through terrible policies that, I mean, ultimately have to be intentional at the top, because nobody can be that stupid, or they appoint people that are stupid to make terrible decisions. But the idea is that what these sustainability goals are, they match with the planks of communism. They're just written kind of in a code. And when you think about poverty, you think about zero hunger, quality education. That's weird that they say quality education for a standard for an SDG, because the UN has said in the last 15 years that education is a threat to sustainability. So how can it be a threat to sustainability, but you want to give people quality education? How do you define education, right? Maybe it's not teaching kids how to read and write. Maybe it's instead teaching kids how to be activists. Maybe it's instead teaching kids how to advocate for communism, or advocate for feminism, or advocate for this or that, which is exactly what you see. I mean, you guys live in California. I'm sure that you see a little bit of it there. In Oregon, just north of you, you don't have to know how to graduate high school. You don't have to know how to read or write. They just graduate high school. You don't have to know basic math in Oregon. I think they extended that policy, but they're definitely educating people there how to be an Antifa. They're definitely educating people there how to be activists and how to turn in, bad elements in society. So that's kind of how we have to look at those SDGs rather, is that when they say gender equality, well, that means there's no distinction of gender, right? There's no male or female, which also ties into transhumanism. When they say, oh, clean water, great, I want clean water. How are you going to do that? Oh, well, nobody has a right to water. Now you have to pay us for the water. Not that we already don't have those kinds of systems. You pay for water in your house, but this is more of like what Nestle was saying. Remember Nestle, the guy that was running Nestle, who became the head of the World Economic Forum temporarily? He said that they were just wanted that water's not a human right, and that a couple of companies should just own all the water in the world. That's what they mean by clean water. Otherwise, like if you look over here in Japan, the water's really clean here. There's no fluoride in the water. The water's really clean here. If you light a match, your house doesn't explode when you do the dishes or when you wash your hands, right? So like Japan already has clean water, but yet some companies are trying to like adopt those SDG goals here. I don't know how that works in Japan, but I know in the US it works with like how Nestle has advocated for nobody having a right to water. So we could go down this whole list, but if they're talking about reduced inequalities, well, how do you have reduced inequalities? You just make everybody equally poor. You make everybody equally unequal to the people that are in charge, and then there's no more inequalities, because there's no more way to determine and define what is better, what is worse, who has more money, because everybody has exactly the same, and that is zero. That is nothing. In fact, there's a story out of communist China I read in a history book. A guy named Frank Decoder, you might have heard me mention him on the show. he got into the archives. One of the first journalists to get into the communist archives in China, wrote a whole book series on it. Fascinating. There's a case where literally the local cadres in a town had to deal with a dispute because someone had a horse and other people didn't have a horse. They literally cut the horse into pieces and distributed the pieces like the mafia to people's houses. So now, Bob doesn't have a horse and you don't have a horse. Now Bob has the leg of a horse, you have the head of a horse, and someone else has the heart and someone else has the tail. Like that's how psychotic these people were. And that's exactly what these SDG goals are. It's one person has something more than you, so let's just break it into little pieces and give everybody a piece of it. That's ultimately what this stuff is when you study history. So these are not good ideas, these are bad ideas, and in terms of implementation, like everything else, it's a slow process until it just becomes the norm, and then by that point the water's boiling and there's not really anything that you can do about it. You don't even have the ability to get out of it at that point.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, Ryan. And also the fascists, basically, and the communists. In communism, they take the cow, and in fascism, they just simply take the milk. So it's the same system, unfortunately. Uh, Joe, do you have any more questions to conclude the interview?
Yeah,
No,
feel free to ask anything else. Like I know we went over a little bit, but it's totally fine if you have any other questions.
Do you have any more questions?
um, I mean, sure, I have lots of questions, but
Yeah, let me share your website to everybody. Maybe you could tell the audience a little bit how they can support you and get your books and check out your website.
Yeah, sure thing. So I don't have an incredibly large web presence, largely because I've been kicked off of so many platforms. We do have a few social media pages, Facebook and X. They're linked up there on the website. You can see off to the right side. There's also a YouTube page that we just got back. My show is primarily, almost exclusively audio only. So we do the show 5 nights a week. I've done the show for 15 years, been around a very long time, and covered probably pretty much everything you can see on the website. I make a new show promo for every show, different show name, different show image. I do it all myself. I don't use AI. I'm very explicit about that with listeners. I don't have AI audio. I don't, unless the show promo calls for using a viral AI image or something. I don't use AI for the stuff that I do. It's all handmade, and I try to present people with a new perspective on things that might be topical, might not be, because I want people to think. I want people to think for themselves, question what I'm saying. There's a lot of stuff tonight that I've said that certainly could be heard wrong and taken out of context. And if you have a question, email me, and I might not believe what you think I believe. I might not that that should matter anyway, but I just want people to think. And I just, I might kind of ramble on because this is my life and I'm so accustomed to talking about these things. But, generally speaking, I'm just an average person, and I've been an average person for 15 years, and I've watched trends and I've watched influencers and people come and go and come and go and come and go and come and go. And if you want something different than all of that, and you want to stop getting scammed and ripped off by those kinds of people, well, then you probably should listen to my show Monday through Friday, The Secret Teachings. Thanks for showing that on the screen, and thank you for having me on the show.
Oh, no problem, Ryan. We really appreciate your insight on all these different topics, and my brother really enjoyed all the answers you gave to these questions. And I'd just like to thank all the viewers for watching. Please subscribe to Ryan's YouTube channel, check him out on Spotify and Twitter and all his other sites, and get one of his books. He writes some really good books that he's written, so you can check those out as well on his website. And just thanks again for everyone who's watched this video. Hope you all have a good day. Please subscribe, and thank you.